All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. So thank you for coming to this session. So there are a couple of other sessions going on as well. So I thought I'll do it a little bit different. Okay. So welcome. Thank you for coming. Live after forums. Move to Apex. I'm Alex. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm one of the Oracle ACE directors. I tweet and I blog. I participated in writing a book. And even though I said I'm never going to do that again, I kind of did. But after this one, I'm never going to do that again. I'm part of the Smart for Apex Corporation. I'm an independent consultant. We're all independent consultants, but we still work together and we help each other when needed. Like I said, one of the Oracle ACE directors. It's all about the community, it's all about sharing your knowledge and so on. If you want to learn more about it, the bit.ly Oracle ACE program, you can learn more about it or come and talk to us, basically. There are more ACEs around. So, one final plug. So, this is a great conference. If you want to spend in the sun doing an Apex conference as well, I promised I would give them a plug. In Malaga, end of May. So there you go. So I was just looking at the program and I saw there's other interesting sessions going on, like the World Cafe and lunch, right? So I'll just turn it around. Okay, I'll start with the two main points that I want to make in these 45 minutes. Yeah. So I'm going to start with a conclusion, basically. So two main points. First one is Oracle Forms. It's not Apex. It's like, well, that's obvious, right? So if you know the logo, Oracle Forms, you're at least as old as I am, right? So the current logo that's Oracle Forms. So Oracle Forms, it's not Apex. Don't try to create an application the way you did it in Forms. Don't ever come up to me and say, well, in Forms I used to do it this way. How do you do it in Apex? Right? So Oracle is not Forms. And vice versa, Forms is not Oracle. It's not Forms. Whatever. So the second point is, everybody's always talking about, like, okay, how do we migrate from Oracle Forms to Apex? Hardly ever you see an actual, like a real migration. It's not a migration. So that was the conclusion. So now you can make up your mind, like, should I stay or should I go, right? So I'm not offended if you decide, well, I'm going to have some lunch. So, all right. So let's get started. So live after Forms. First of all, why would you want to move away from Forms? Right? So the form application, most of the time, they've been around for quite a while. But people coming into your company, in their spare time, they work with different kinds of applications, right? Like they use Google, and they use Facebook, and they use Twitter, and Instagram, and whatnot. It's very rarely that you actually read the manual, like, okay, so how do I use Instagram? So people they know how it works, right? You give an iPad to, like, a toddler, and they know how to swipe and do and purchase whatever they want, right? Because it's very intuitive. And people tend to expect that kind of behavior, those self-explanatory applications, from business applications as well, right? It's very common for an Oracle Forms application, if you have a new hire in your company, to send them on, like, a 2-week training course, right? It used to be very common, right? So people, even like the superheroes out there, they like to have new stuff as well, new applications to work with, right? So even though the BET computer in 1966 was like state of the art, right? Even Batman would say, well, okay, I need a new interface, okay? So you just want to modernize your business applications. So another reason could be that you say, I want to move to the cloud. It's the thing now, right? Going to the Oracle Cloud or whatever cloud you want. Cloud points there. So that could be one other reason to to move away. Yeah? So on the other hand, why don't you just stay where you are? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? These forms applications in the wild, let me put it that way, have been around for multiple years, like decades. If an application has been around for 10 years and still being used, it's a really successful application. Right? All the knowledge that has built up over the years is going to be in that application. So it must be a really good application. Some people say, well, but Oracle Forms, right? They're not doing anything anymore. The last release is August 2017. So it's still being updated. They still get new features in there. It's still going to go into the next phase, right? So Forms is not dead. It might smell a bit funny, but it's not dead. Okay? So there are valid reasons just to stay where you are. You've invested lots in it. Stay where you are. Update to the latest release. Why not, right? All right. So Forms, it's not Apex. Apex is not Forms. They're two different technologies. And they work different. They have a different paradigm to them and how you deal with it. If you're moving from Oracle Forms to Apex, like the first thing you encounter, or one of the first things you encounter, is the builder interface. Okay, and this will look familiar. If you're coming from Forms, it looks familiar. On your left-hand side, there's the tree, where you can see all your components. In the middle, you have your visual representation of the actual page that you're working on. And on the far right, is your the property palette, where you can inspect and change all your properties. So the interface, the IDE that you're using in Apex as opposed to the one in Forms, they have a bit similar. So it's pretty easy to get around, find your way around. Still might be tricky to find that specific property that you were looking for, but at least like the layout is similar between Oracle Forms and Apex. A lot of Oracle Form applications that I see, they have something like that, like a tabular layout. It's called a multi-record block, I'll forget that, where people basically add data and change it and so on. So in the early days of Apex, this was really tricky to rebuild, to build a tabular form. So it was always tricky. And so a new paradigm, like a web application paradigm, you see that more often. So you can have your tabular overview of your data. And if you wanted to edit a row, you would click on the pencil or the edit icon, and it would pop up like a modal where you can just change that one row. So this is a very common pattern, as opposed to that multi-record block where you change all your data at once. Show a report with a form on top of it. Right? So with Apex 5.1, they introduced the interactive grid. And it does exactly what it says. It's an interactive grid. It shows you the data in a grid format, and you can edit all your data all over the place. A bit like that multi-record block. So if your users are really fond of that multi-record block, you can always switch to the interactive grid. Yeah? So with that interactive grid, you can also have master detail record. That used to be a challenge, let me put it that way, but you can have multiple interactive grids on your page, and you can have like a master detail relations going on there. All right, so there are some similarities between Apex and like the builder and like some of these paradigms. A big difference between Apex and Forms is the way they handle the locking of your data. So you have your pessimistic locking, your optimistic locking. We're Apex, right? You're very optimistic about the stuff. What Forms used to do is if you have your database, and you have all your data in your database and tables and so on, you'd have your Forms application on top. When you start editing data, you would get a database connection. I'm going to lock this row. If you lock a certain row in the table and you go out for lunch, and you come back 2 hours later, it's still locked. Right? So you might have an issue with your colleagues. Right? With Apex, like a real thick database connection like that, it's no longer the case. Okay, so you have your browser, and people work through that browser. When they're going to interact with the database, they basically set up a connection, and they get a connection from the connection pool. They get data from the database. A page is being rendered by that Apex engine, and that gets sent back to the browser. So after the page is displayed in the browser, there is no database connection. Okay, so if you request a page from the database and it's shown in your browser, you go out for lunch for 2 hours, that's fine, there is no locking going on. So the mechanism behind the locking of records and not the read consistency, but like how you serialize your transaction and detect if someone else made changes to the data, it works differently. Okay, and you have to be aware of that. So that's why you cannot apply all your Oracle Forms logic directly to Oracle Apex. Okay? So migration. It's always going to be like that. Someone's going to call you, well, we're going to do a migration from tool X to tool Z, whatever. Right? And they say it's going to be a migration. If you're going to Google for Oracle Forms migration, there are a number of tools that pop up, that show up. Okay? I don't know any of the tools. Well, I heard of some of them. I haven't worked them. I not necessarily endorse them. So I'd like to learn more about it, but I haven't. So I'm just saying, if you Google, this is what you get, right? Some claim to get your Oracle Forms application and transform it into some sort of web application. Right? So, and other give you different options on that. I know Mia from Aura Player, and she came up with like, well, Forms, it's not extinct, right? It's still alive and kicking, and they modernize your Forms application. Okay, that's how I understand it, at least. I haven't worked with that product, but just saying. So, I'm from Holland, and we have a saying in Dutch. I thought, well, you can have old wine in a new bottle. And I talked to Chris, thank you very much. He said, well, I understand what you're saying, but it's not an English expression, right? And I don't know if there's a German equivalent, so, okay. So Chris said, well, why don't you just say, well, it's a mutton dressed as a lamb, right? Like, yeah, sounds pretty good. And someone else suggested, no, you should say it's like lipstick on a pig, right? So you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig, right? Someone else says, no, it should be like you can have a new dress, but you still get the same wrinkles, right? I think that if you really get your Forms application and you transform it whatever way you go without touching any code, what you end up with is just, you get the same, you get all the good from the application, but also all the bad. It's just new and shiny, and it looks different, but it's still the same thing. So with migration, that doesn't really cover what you're going to do. Does that make sense? Yeah? So if the business decides we're going to move away from Forms, we're going to build in a new technology, that's like the golden opportunity, basically, to get rid of all the crap that you built over the last couple of years and rebuild something like brand new. Take all the good, leave behind all the bad. Okay, so I think migration is a bad terminology. Okay, so in Oracle Apex, like many years ago, I think it was 3, but I'm not really sure about that. They introduced like, oh, you can do a migration from Oracle Forms to Apex, actually. And the way there are still some remnants in Apex. So the way to go about it is to get your FMB source code, your Forms source code, transform it to the XML variation. There's a Forms to XML conversion of it. And if you do that, you can upload it to Apex, and it can do an analysis on it, and see what kind of blocks are in your Forms application, what kind of code, what kind of triggers, and so on and so on. Okay, so that part, like the migration project, it's still in Apex. So if you go to your application builder, like the lowest, like the bottom option there, it's migration. Yeah. So if you go there, of course it will start a wizard. Everything's wizard driven in Apex, right? So here's where you can upload that XML representation of your Oracle form. So that forms to XML conversion you have to do outside of Apex. So that XML representation you can upload to Apex. And for this example, I used Apex ships one of those XML files with it as a sample, like, oh, you can try this, you can kick the tires using this XML file. So it's a customer F&B XML. So you upload it, follow the wizard, are you sure you want to do it, create it, and you can do multiple files if you want to. So if you take those example customer F&B files, and you go through the wizard, what you end up with is it stops working. Okay. Or you might get an exception like that. There's something with the XML which is not, it's not a well-defined XML. You do end up with your project anyway, but it doesn't give you any information about what's in it. Okay. So clean up your XML. If you want to use that sample and see what's going on, clean up the XML. There's like a comparison somewhere with a less than in it. So you have to escape that one and format it as XML again, and then it will actually work. So this will give you, I just uploaded the one. It will give you some information about what's in this F&B file, or what is in this XML representation of your F&B file. How many blocks, how many triggers, how many program units are in there, and so on. So it also gives you, if you're less familiar with Oracle Forms, like for the youngsters out there, it also gives you like a short description of like all these form objects. What are they actually? Okay, so what is an alert, and what is a block, and what do we mean by a canvas? Yeah, so it gives you some information about that. Like all the triggers that are in there are going to be extracted from that F&B, or the XML of the, well, you get it. And it will show you all the trigger information. Are they all relevant for Apex? No. Okay, so you have to be careful about that. So there's like a post-query trigger, or a when-tree node selected trigger, right? You're not going to convert those in Apex. So the program units, list all the program units within that single F&B. You might want to get that source code and reuse it, but if it's source, you can look into details of it, and if you look at the details like that, it's kind of tricky to read it, and then you have to interpret like, okay, so what is going on? So there's a procedure expand all, and it does something with a tree node, and so on. So you still have to do a lot of interpretation yourself in order to understand what's going on in that form. Yeah. So I thought, well, it would be fun. Like for one of my projects, I said, oh, let's do that. So I converted everything to XML, uploaded the whole shebang, and some really had a lot of information there, like 91 items and 40 triggers and stuff going on as well. Okay, so it's just metadata describing your forms that is going to be collected in Apex. Okay. Of course, you run into some problems with that. It doesn't exist. Or if you look at, like, if you have a report showing on a form, it will give you like, oh, there's a mistake in your query. And then you have to try to figure out, okay, so where is it? And it turns out sometimes, and it gives you like case-sensitive column names. Opening up there like the F&B in the builder, it didn't show any. So something happened on the way to, well. So when things start to go wrong, things like this you can explain. That's the time when you start looking at the documentation, right? Okay, I must be the only one who just experiments first and then read the documentation after. So I understand that. So go into documentation about migration projects in Apex, it actually says it may seem quicker just to build an application from scratch. Right? So you can read through all the listing of codes and triggers and blocks and whatnot, but sometimes you just have to make your best guess. Okay, I think this is going on. Talk to the users, read the documentation, right? And build from scratch. Okay. So if you're going to build your application from scratch, put most of your logic, or make sure that your database is at least, it's like the model is still correct, up to date. This is your big chance, basically, to make some changes to it as well. Okay. Get your check constraints and stuff in place. See how you can discover your business logic in the forms. And if you identify those pieces of logic, like we always want to work this way, or this should be, you can only create an order if there's a customer, that kind of stuff. Validations, that kind of stuff. If you have that logic in your forms, please bring them down to the database. So the more stuff you put in your database, the more logic you can put in there. I think that's the way forward, basically. One of my colleagues called me a database extremist, so I believe put everything in the database, and you put like a thin layer of veneer on top of it as your user interface. So if you do that, you still have your Oracle Forms application interacting with your database, but you can build your Apex application basically next to it and still interact with the same data. Okay? So you don't have to go big bang, get rid of forms, pop up this new Apex. Okay? So you can go gradually from certain modules of your forms application and rebuild them in Apex. Like I said, put everything in your database. So the way I like to set up my applications is tables at the bottom, tables in the database, Apex on top, and separate everything with views and packages. Okay. So this is the way I like to do it. And we can discuss later on if you feel like it or not. Most formed applications have a certain hierarchy to them. They have like certain coding standard for each of their forms and how they interact with one another. So say you have a form labeled 1000, it might be like a dashboard or your main screen, and it had some detailed pages on it. You can apply similar naming standard in Apex as well. And that's what I like to use as well, Apex, the page aliases, and that's how I bring structure to all the pages. So we set apart a range of pages that are for a certain topic, like for a certain module within our application. So when we have that structure defined, more or less, I like to have like one view, one dedicated view per page. Okay, the naming standard that I like to use is the v underscore followed by that page alias. So the page alias is just the application alias followed by the page number. Okay. So the 1010 page has a view which also has the 1010 reference in there. 1020 has its own view. So 1021 also a dedicated view. Having multiple views, get like the underscore 2, like the underscore 1 is implicit. I don't go with the 0. Yeah? So why do I make that thing? Why do I make it like a hassle about it? Say you're gonna, well, in these views there's gonna be like a reference to a table, most likely. So if the table is gonna change, either the view will get invalidated, and because the view might get invalidated, you know that you have to adjust or at least check the view. You know also which page in Apex you have to check, okay, because they're directly connected. So let's say this is our customer table and that's a customer page, and it's kind of like, well, it's obvious, right, that a customer table and a customer page, there's a link there, okay. So, but you can also use your dependency data dictionary views to see it doesn't only, like the table is not only referenced in that view, but it's also referenced in that view. And because it's referenced in that view, you know you also have to check that page in Apex. So it makes dependency impact analysis a bit easier. Okay, so that's why I do it the way I do. So for report pages, well, we use read-only views. It only makes sense, right, to have a read-only view for a reporting page. All other views, like for your forms and so on, we're going to use regular views. You always have two options. You have a simple view or a complex view. Now we're going to use these views to also process DML, insert, updates, deletes, merges, and so on. So with a simple view, well, that's easy to work with, right? With complex view, it's harder. Right? So simple views, easy to work with, just follow the wizard. Apex, everything's the wizard. You're going to create a form on it, follow the wizard, say, okay, I want to use that view, and you're done. Include a check option in those views. Yeah? So that's easy. Simple views, single table, easy to do. Like the complex views, they get a bit trickier. Yeah? Because now you cannot just follow the wizard. You have to build your own DML processes for it. And I will show you how to do that as well, so stick with me. So simple view, single table, one view, Apex. So the interaction in if showing data on the page, Apex page, is going to be, well, straight query from that view. It's going to show it. If you want to do DML, just do DML right through the view. With a complex view, it's trickier. So say we have like a multi-join table with some aggregates in there and so on, analytic functions and a model clause to top it all off, basically. A view there, expose that one in Apex, and now the DML processes that you need to write yourself, they're going to be from Apex calling a package, and the package will take care of the DML processing on your tables. Okay? So when you're going to write code like that, it's going to be, well, it can be tricky. What you got to be aware of, at least, is your last update detection. Yeah? So just to see how things work in Apex. We have our Apex page at the top, our table, and some data at the bottom. Yeah? So if you're going to request a page to be shown, like with that employee data, Scott and department 10, it's going to set up a database connection, and it's going to generate the page with the data, and after it's shown in the browser, your database connection is gone. Yeah? If you make some changes to your data, you change from department 10 to 20, and you hit save, what's going to happen is you're going to set up a database connection. You're going to set up a database connection. The values from your page are going to be stored in the database, update, and then your database connection is gone. So the interaction with the database is only going to be really short-lived. Yeah. So far, so good. All is good, all is well. The problem exists if you have multiple users. Well, go figure, right? It's always these users that give you problems. So 2 sessions, 2 different sessions. So first session, ask for data from this employee table. Sets up a database connection, gets the page with the data, and the second session does the same. Ask the same data, gets a page, short database connection. First one makes a change to the department number. Now someone else will make a change to, like a name, whatever, something else. So first session hits save, gets the database connection, gets all the data from the page, and updates it in the database. So the department number is changed, and the database connection is gone. Now the second user hits save, gets the database connection, issues an update based on the values from the screen, and he wins, basically. He's the last one to hit save, he wins. So the update of the first one is lost, as if it never happened. So if you don't take this into account, you might lose your lose updates. Right? So one way of detecting those changes is by not only querying the data from your table, but also like generating a hash value, like MD5 hash. So instead of just getting the values from the table, also generate a hash. So when the first user asks for the data and that page, the values are projected in the screen. You don't necessarily have to expose them as well, like you can hide the MD5 hash. And the second user gets the same data with the same values to begin with, right? So first one makes changes, department is changed. Second one makes changes to the name. Session 1 hits save and establishes the database connection. Now what you need to do is, instead of just doing the update, is first check the MD5 coming from the screen, how does it compare to the MD5 hash in the database? If they're the same, you can just go ahead, make the update, make the changes, and do the update on the database. And because the values are changed in the database, it will also reflect in your MD5 hash. Yeah, because something changed, so the MD5 hash is also changed. Now, if the second session hits save, it's going to establish database connection, and you're going to do the same thing. MD5 hash coming from the screen, how does it compare to the one on the database? Well, they're different. And because they're different, you at least give a notice, like, okay, someone else changed the data, please refresh your screen, that kind of action. So just to help you along, like, how do you write code like that? We can see how, excuse me, we can see how Oracle Apex, or Apex does it. If you go to the SQL workshop, there's a utilities section. So in that utilities section, there's a number of utilities that you can use, and one of them is the method on tables. And of course, that's also wizard-driven, so you can provide a name for it, and you can say, oh, it needs to be on this table. But that's not the really interesting part. The interesting part is where it actually generates a package specification and a body. So just by looking at the code, you can get inspiration for your own code. One of the functions in that package is how to build your MD5 hash. Yeah? So what it does, it uses the Apex util getHash function. You pass in all the columns, and it will generate a MD5 hash for you. Easy enough. So how is that processing of the update go? There's also a function, a procedure in there that does the update. So just to focus on the important bits, the first thing it does is does a select for update. It will actually lock the row that you are going to change. So after you lock the row, an MD5 hash is built, based like a newly generated one from all the values in the database. Yeah? Now it's going to check if the MD5 argument that is coming in, how does it compare to the newly generated MD5 hash? Are they the same? And if they are the same, you can go ahead and do the update. Yeah? If they're not the same, so someone else must have changed the data, raise an application error. Current version of the data in the database has changed, and so on. So this is just a sample of how you can write your own MD5 checking. Yeah? So to detect changes there. So that's the way I like to set up my applications. Tables at the bottom, views to separate everything, and packages to interact with the data again. So when you put everything in your database, you have your robust database that does all the checking and the validation and so on and so on. You can still have your forms application running against that data. Okay? And of course, your Apex application. And you probably, if you want to really get into newer things, or at least like, well, maybe you can expose some of the services that you're offering through an ORDS interface, like a REST, as a REST endpoint. Or maybe you're like, well, I'll forget all this Apex, I want to move to Jet. You still have the option. If you put everything in a database and you have your thin layer of veneer on top, I think you're future-proofing yourself as well. That's just an opinion there. yeah, I'm just going to show you some examples of forms applications that we transform. So I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see like people tend to use like, okay, this is the way it used to look in forms. This is how we're rebuild those in Apex as well. All right. 10 minutes. So just as the last part of it, I got in contact with a company. Well, it wasn't me at first. And they said, well, we have this really old Windows server, and it runs like 10G database and Form 6. And, well, we have a problem with that one, because the application, it runs fine, and we're happy with it. Security was like there was only one computer in the whole building, which had the correct JInitiator version on it. And they wanted to really get rid of that old server. They really wanted to, so they needed to migrate. Okay, so the business case was, it was just getting too old. If the whole building was updating to the newest and latest Windows release, this one would always, this computer, this one single computer sitting in this room, that was a problem, okay, because they couldn't update it. So security was by the lock on the door, right? There was only one computer. The problem with the application, besides that, was like it was minimal documentation, and they weren't really sure how it did what it did. Okay, the users, they were like, yeah. So it was basically, well, reverse engineer whatever is there and build something new. Yeah. Later on in the project, or while the project was going on, I discovered that I didn't have the latest source code. So that's quite a challenge. If you see something happening on the screen and you read the code and you're like, that's not supposed to happen, right? So that's kind of strange. So because the company had they had a need to change this application to something modern, they sent, of course, what do? You send your sales guy in there. I stole your picture, Chris, sorry. So, yeah. So he said, well, yeah, sure we can do that, right? No problem. So if you send a sales guy in, so do you know how you can tell if a sales guy is lying to you? His lips are moving. Right. So he said, well, what do you mean, 5? He said, well, we're going to do it in 5 weeks. No problem. Well, we have just minimal documentation, and we're not really sure how it works. Well, you know how sales guys are, right? Oh, yeah. Yes, okay. So at that point, they called me, because, like, he was selling something. He went back to the company, and does anyone know Apex? Well, no. And so they called me and said, go ahead. You have 5 weeks. So minimal documentation, which was outdated as well, and they weren't really sure how the application works. So the first step you do is go to the end users. Please show me how your application works. So you talk to the end users and say, so what do you do? How do you work, right? You say, well, I just push the blue button. Okay, so and what does it do if you push the blue button? I don't know. Just on my list it says, you go there, you push the blue button. And that's what they did. I wish it was a joke, but actually they had just a list of things to do. So the application itself, like what they did was they collected files from different sources. They were renamed in a certain format, put on a database server, yeah, in a certain folder with a certain structure. Then you would open up the application and push the blue button. And that's how they would work. So they were very friendly and very helpful, and they loved bananas, but they didn't really understand what they were doing. So thankfully, with just a real small data model, so I kind of started cleaning that up. There were lots of foreign keys missing, and integrity was, well, so I started cleaning that kind of up. They also had like real strange naming conventions, but I won't bore you with the details. But it was very confusing to start with. So then I had to get like my workstation to have my own forms builder. So they said, oh, we have Form 6. But apparently they had like Form 6 source code, which was open in a Forms 9. And if you do that, even if you don't change a thing, you don't hit save, you just cancel out of it, they're still marked as, oh, this is a 9 version, for whatever reason. Thank you. So I finally had something installed. 10G, now finally I could really see what was going on, right? Of course, when you try to open your forms, your libraries weren't linked together, correctly. But oh well, you basically pass on. Who cares about the libraries, right? Or every now and then it just stopped working for whatever reason. Right? So and if you were really lucky, in those few minutes that you can actually see a form, it would actually look like that. Yeah. So and then try to, okay, so what were you doing? Yeah, I pushed the blue, well, which blue button, right? Yeah. Or like this, where no items were shown at all. So I only had like the tree to go by, and then it's like, okay, you have to check each and every item, and like see, okay, there is a button here somewhere, so which one is the button, right? So their main screen was like a small cockpit where they could actually see which files were uploaded or not uploaded or something going on there. So this screen, it was built on a temporary table, a global temporary table. Yeah. Of course, it was a function which returns a ref cursor on which the block was built. And for each of the columns that you see, there was a function call. So per column, a function call. Yeah. And just to illustrate like how they really didn't know, there's like a history date at the bottom. And they thought that if you put a date there, you could actually see like historical data, so what's going on and so on and so on. No, what it did was if you put in a date there, it would basically reload the files based on that date. So it worked differently than they thought it worked. So I said, oh, this needs to be like an exact replication of in Apex. So that's what you try to be friendly, right? So that's what I did. I created something similar. I said, oh yeah, that looks good. So I showed you like the original source was with that temporary table. Well, you can't use global temporary tables in Apex. Well, you can, but like the results that you get back are kind of, you know, sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't, right? Building a page on the ref cursor, that's not going to work, right? And even though at that time, when they built the forms application way back when, a function call per column sounded like the best idea ever, that's really an idiot idea. At least that's what I think. So I replaced everything with just a single view. One view to collect the data and display it to the users. So as we were looking more closely into like what this form was actually showing, or this report was actually showing them, started talking. I went to the users like multiple times a day, every day. So going along, we figured out, okay, this was important if that file was uploaded. So what was that one? So this one was like an outgoing file. I got no clue why that file was listed over there, because it wasn't really of importance, okay, for the process. So these next three were important, as was the fourth one, but that one, it wasn't important either. So they're looking at checkboxes, and they shouldn't be there, okay? So if all the blue arrows were uploaded, they could do the final, and if there was a check in that one, all was good, right? So that was the most important one, the last one, actually. So I changed this overview just to a report. It was per day, and I showed them, well, you can also, I did this on Friday afternoon, and said we can also display it this way. So now you know that like the green ones are the ones that are done, the orange ones are ready for processing, and the blue ones, well, we're still missing data there. It was like, well, you don't ask them, so what do you want? Oh, we want the exact same thing. You just give them something different. Okay. So, of course, happy ending, right? So with all this, a new server, 12C database, Apex 5.1, of course, fully documented, and with the latest source code. And because I went to the users so often, they really understood what they were doing. And because they started understanding what they were doing, they said, well, this is stupid what we're doing, pushing blue buttons. So that was nice. All right, yeah. Good. So my two main points. Yep, thank you very much. So first of all, forms, sorry about that. Forms is not Apex, not even the modern forms. It's a different tool, it's a different way of working. Yeah? And the second one, it's not called a migration. If you have any questions, I'm still around until the end of the day. Otherwise, thank you very much.